Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Roger Johnson and Nina Warhurst.
Hello, good morning. Our headlines today. The row over schools intensifies. A number of councils join teaching unions in calling for a delay in primary pupils returning en masse in England. But the chair of the Education Select Committee warns that children could suffer.
Absolutely, where possible, we should keep our schools opening. We are damaging our young children's life chances.
City leaders in Liverpool go one step further and demand a national lockdown.
The race to protect the vulnerable. Hundreds of sites across the UK get ready to roll out the Oxford vaccine.
Good morning. Have Arsenal turned a corner? Well, a convincing victory at a snowy Hawthorns makes it 3 league wins in a row for Mikel Arteta's side.
Good morning. It's a day of sunshine and showers, and although it's not going to feel it, the air's a tiny bit less cold today. That means many of the showers will come through as rain. They'll be most frequent for eastern Scotland, eastern areas of England, but I'll have a full forecast coming up a little bit later on.
Good morning, it's Sunday the 3rd of January. Our top story today, some councils and teaching unions in England are continuing to pile pressure on the government, calling for primary schools to be kept closed to the majority of pupils after the Christmas holidays.
Teaching unions have told primary school staff it is unsafe to return to work because of rising coronavirus cases. But writing in the Sunday Telegraph, the head of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, warns time away from the classroom should be kept to the absolute minimum. Our political correspondent, Chris Mason, has more.
This is Brighton, where primary schools were due to reopen this week after the Christmas holidays. But now the local authority is advising that they shouldn't, and has asked the Education Secretary to intervene too.
We've written to Gavin Williamson to ask him to close our primary schools in line with the decision that he's made in London and other areas. But what we've also done is written to schools directly ourselves and asked them to, or advised them that we think the right decision is for them to move to remote learning on Monday and only be open for children of key workers and our most vulnerable children as well.
And this is Birmingham, where the City Council has said it will support any primary school head teachers who decide to shift to learning from home. And this morning, local leaders in Liverpool are calling for another national lockdown. They argue the current tiers system in England isn't working.
We feel that, to curb this virus, particularly with the new strain, it's really important that we tackle it head on and that we're proactive rather than reactive when things get really bad, and that a lockdown would help to resolve that.
The government's default position is that schools in England should remain open wherever possible. But with some local authorities saying that schools should close and the biggest teaching union telling its members that it's not safe for them to go to work, what happens next is not entirely in ministers' hands. How many more councils could suggest schools close for most pupils? How many teachers will turn up in classrooms? Union leaders are in touch with one another this weekend, coordinating their actions. The Department for Education says it will only move to remote schooling as a last resort. The pandemic robbed us of many things in 2020, not least certainty. It's going to do the same thing again for many parents and pupils for the first few months of this year, at least. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, who joins us. Some councils going against orders to keep schools open, the teaching unions launching legal action. Jonathan, it's a busy morning for the government. It'll be interesting to hear what the Prime Minister has to say on the Andrew Marr programme later.
It certainly will, Roger. He'll be facing questions about this and many other things, I'm sure. And as you say, it is a tricky and uncertain situation for children, parents, teachers, school staff and more this morning. As things stand, most primary schools in England are due to open tomorrow to all pupils. But as we've seen in the last few days, the government has shifted its position and has now moved to keep all primaries in London closed to most children, while the children of key workers and those deemed to be vulnerable will still be able to attend, with most others engaging in online learning. The unions joining forces, urging the government in various forms to make that the default across England, and some local authorities, as you say, taking things into their own hands as well, as you saw in Chris's report there. We have this timely intervention this morning from the Chief Inspector of Ofsted, England's School Inspectorate, Anna Spielman, who is saying that we can't furlough young people's learning or wider development. Amanda Spielman, I should say. Somebody else who is broadly of that opinion is the MP Robert Halfon, who chairs the House of Commons Schools Select Committee.
Absolutely, where possible, we should keep our schools opening. We are damaging our young children's life chances. We know that during the last lockdown, millions of children did hardly any learning at all. Whatever remote learning goes on, it is patchy. In parts, hundreds of thousands of vulnerable children or disadvantaged children still don't have proper computers at home. Nothing is a substitute for being at school.
Now, the Department for Education is stressing that schools will continue to implement safety measures to contain the spread of coronavirus in schools, but it does say we'll move to remote education as a last resort. Is the result of all this pressure now meaning that the government will have no option but to view that last resort as the action that it has to take? As you suggest, the Prime Minister will face questions on this and other topics to do with the government's coronavirus response on the Andrew Marr programme in an hour or so.
Jonathan, thank you. Over on BBC One.
The NHS is preparing to roll out the new Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine tomorrow at a small number of hospitals around the UK as the health service begins ramping up the biggest immunisation programme in its history.
Pressure is mounting to protect millions more vulnerable people amid concerns of a new variant of coronavirus, which is spreading out of control. Our health correspondent Catherine Da Costa has this report.
Some of the first precious doses of a life-saving vaccine. The Princess Royal Hospital in West Sussex is one of a small number of hospitals that will begin inoculating people with the Oxford vaccine tomorrow, before the rollout's extended to more than 700 sites later in the week.
We're really pleased to be one of the early sort of areas that will be giving this vaccine, because we know that it's going to protect people, protect our staff, and it's the thing that's going to help us manage this pandemic.
Unlike the Pfizer jab, the Oxford vaccine can be stored in a fridge, making it much easier to distribute to hundreds of GP surgeries, vaccination centres and care homes. The elderly are most at risk from the virus. That's why the focus is to vaccinate most care home residents and staff by the end of the month. Margaret Keenan became the first person in the world to receive the Pfizer vaccine outside of clinical trials nearly a month ago. Since then, nearly 1 million people have had their first dose. Now armed with the Oxford vaccine, the race is on to protect 30 million of the most vulnerable, including NHS frontline workers, many of whom now worn out, having battled the virus for nearly a year, only to see it threatening to overwhelm the health service once again.
I know it's going to be worse. That's the only thing we know. I know that we're massively stretched at the moment. Our nursing numbers are diluted. The staff are exhausted on intensive care. And we've got a long way more to go before we hit the peak.
For now, there's still no let-up in sight. Yesterday saw another record high, with more than 57,000 new COVID cases recorded. The NHS is bracing itself for even greater pressure in the weeks ahead. Vaccines, though, bring hope that this virus can be defeated. Catherine Da Costa, BBC News.
The Shadow Culture Secretary Jo Stevens is being treated in hospital for COVID-19. A statement about the 54-year-old Labour MP was released on her Twitter feed last night, where her team thanked people for their good wishes. Sir Keir Starmer has described her as a dear colleague and friend and wished her well.
Rescuers in Norway have found a fourth body at the site of a massive landslide near Oslo. Emergency teams are still searching for several people who've been missing since the hillside collapsed on the village of Ask on Wednesday. Freezing conditions are hindering the progress of the operation.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.